Uh, this is all very difficult for me to really talk about because when you think about the way the world has changed in recent years, to tell you that someone is not able to go to a public library because they are the wrong color of skin seems to be something totally unbelievable. But it did in fact happen, and it is a part of my history. During the 60s, in the civil rights movement in Louisiana, I was a science student, and I was studying this particular fish for the science fair. And the little small library that we had in the black community wasn't very big. And we were not allowed as black people to go to the main library where I could get research material. Subsequently, I waited until it transpired that the government of the United States passed a desegregation law that enabled me to go to the library. And I'm sure I was the first black person to ever go into this library. But before I went, I called and told them that I was coming. And I know that sounds odd, but I didn't want my grandmother to get into any trouble or difficulty because she worked for the sheriff as a cook. And I called the library, and I asked them if it would be okay. They said, well, the law has changed, and of course you can come. And when I got there, the first thing I remember, and you have to understand I was just a kid, I remember these great big huge doors. And I opened the doors and went in, and the one thing I remember more than anything else was the eyes of the people who were there. They were not welcoming eyes. They were the eyes of people who hated me and didn't want me in this space. I went in, I found the reference material that I needed, took down the information that I needed, and on the way out, I decided that I would drink from the water fountain that was marked white only. And that time, we had water fountains in all public buildings that were marked colored and white. Black people could only drink from the colored fountain, and white people drank from the white fountain. It was sort of an apartheid, basically. And when you think of this kind of thing, as a young boy, it scarred me and made me super sensitive to the notion of racism in Western civilization. It was my first experience in what I call the white man's world. All of my teachers and everybody that I dealt with on a regular basis, day in and day out, were black. I never had any confrontation or any involvement in the white community at all until this time. And the one thing you learn from all of that is that you would hope that we have moved on and that racism is not such a big deal anymore. But that just simply isn't the case. Racism is still with us, and it is still as pervasive, and it is still as hurtful. I remember when I came to London in 1989, I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to encounter racism anymore. And the surprising thing was that there was as much racism here then as now, but it's a different kind of racism. And the interesting thing is, you would think that that would make you angry, but it didn't. It was sort of like putting on an old shoe. It gave you reference. It gave you an understanding of where you were and who you were. And I clearly believe that if you're treated like a second-class citizen long enough, you begin to act like a second-class citizen. By that, what I mean is that if you're treated as if you do not belong, and if you are not a part of or treated like a second-class citizen, you begin to behave that way. You begin to act that way. And in that, it also reinforces a notion in everyone else's mind that you are a second-class citizen. It is a problem that I've always had to struggle with, and perhaps young black people born today don't feel the same, but I can surely understand why the prisons and correctional institutions are full of black young men, because they are not given much choice. I mean, there are places in the area where I live where most of the people who are patrons in the restaurants and whatnot are black. But there is not one black person who is in the employ of the guy who owns the place. When I go out, and sometimes now, I'm amazed at how separate still places are. You go out to a bar or a restaurant, and these places are either predominantly white or predominantly black. And it's 2013. You would think that that wouldn't be the case, and that things would have moved on. But they really haven't. And maybe I'm oversensitive to this kind of thing. And I sometimes go to art exhibitions and shows and like that, and I'm always surprised, I'm always aware of how many black people are there as opposed to how many white people are there. And I'm always amazed that no one else seems to see this. And maybe they don't see it because they hadn't had the same experiences I had. And my experiences have left me with not a resentment so much, or a hatred, because I'm not that kind of person, but with a sense of unease about where Western civilization has gone and my place in Western civilization. When I look at pictures of or documentaries of Prince Harry in Africa, and he's surrounded by all of these little black kids, I don't see the same thing that the royal family would like me to see. I see a young man whose livelihood, whose income and all of their welfare has been made from pillaging and plundering of the resources of Africa by English society. And I hate the fact that Africans are used as some sort of example of the white man's compassion, when in fact, the reason that the Africans are in that situation is because of what they've done. I know I say the word white and black as if they are separate, and that's because they do exist separately. They exist separately not only in fact, but in cultural behavior. I believe that if we continue on this path, I don't think there is any hope for a homogeneous social society that's going to enable us to live comfortably with each other. And we are becoming more and more polarized, even far more than what it was when I was a young man.